Hello everyone. I'm going to give the English talk of a speech I gave at the National Library recently, where they asked me, as part of the National Reading Month, which is October 2023, to speak on the value of children's literature. And this is something I agreed very willingly. I would love to speak on that always, because this is something I truly believe in, how valuable children's literature is. And this is something, learning to appreciate literature as a child had benefited me personally in my own life. So like a lot of the work that I do in language teaching in libraries is connected to real personal experiences where I have benefited because of the upbringing that I got in my own childhood. So appreciation of children's literature I'm going to talk about today, explaining why I think it's important that you expose your children to good literature, and I will do that by listing some of the benefits I think you will gain or your child will gain if they are allowed to have a love of books, a love of reading, a love of storytelling, hearing stories when they are very young. Okay, so I'm going to start by showing you, before telling you why it's important, how to get children to like books, because this is a question that I get asked very often. How do you make children like books in an environment where they are very attracted to other platforms like TikTok or digital media, telephones or whatever? And I think the answer still remains what I would have given even before all this came, is the answer I give is to tell them that children learn through imitation mainly. When they are very small, they look at the adults around them and generally try to do what they see them doing. And if you want your child to read, please be a reader yourself first, whether you're the mother or the father. And of course, life, trying to live in Sri Lanka is now more survival race than anything, and you might not have the time. But if you can spare 10 minutes, like a few minutes, in which to show your child that you actually have a book in your hand and that you actually enjoy the process of reading, they might think there's something of value in the action that they think their adult close to them is doing. So if you can find some time to show children that you yourself love to read, that you enjoy books, that there is some pleasure that you get out of reading, that is one way in which you can mold your own child to be a reader. Secondly, I'll tell you how I was taught to read when I was very, very small. Is that my father used to, I have a brother as well, and he used to have both of us on the floor, lying on the floor, and he used to be in the middle carrying a book, and after lunch or something, after we came home from school, he used to read. And then he did this very interesting thing. He read a few pages and then he used to stop at a really exciting place and say, we'll read this tomorrow. So after a few of those times, we simply didn't wait till he took the book up again. We tried to read ourselves to see what happened. And children's books, if you buy the good ones, they're always with pictures. So even if you can't read the words, you can look at the picture and then see, what you can, you can probably guess the story by looking at the pictures. And good children's books have really, really good pictures. And that's the benefit that you can exploit, even if your child can't still read the words. Because children have a lot of imagination and the pictures will make them tell their own story. Okay, so that was to answer, before I talk about the benefits of all this, to show that there are ways you can use. I'm sure there are other ways. I showed you the way I was given a love of reading. Maybe I should also add, if you look at the home I have now, there are many books, and this habit was given to me again by my parents, and they were both in the academic profession. Amma was a school teacher and Appachi was in the campus. They used to have this habit, if one of us did, like my brother or I had some kind of achievement in our lives, they used to give us this particular gift. They used to say, okay, will take you to a bookshop. You buy any book that you want, right? Now, them being teachers and lecturers, they didn't have much money either. But on that day, we were let free in a bookshop and told to pick whatever we like without even bothering about the cost. So we used to like walk around and maybe buy a huge encyclopedia, or if we made sure it was a very big book, and that used to be bought for us, and they used to write. This was given to Madhubhashini or Samtajiva for getting a music prize or coming first or second in class or something. That achievement was written in the book, so that we, in our lives, our collection of books becoming bigger was connected to a sense of personal triumph, right? That some sense of achievement. And we used to have, both of us had bookshelves in our room and even in the hall. Like right now I'm in the hall and what you can see is books. Because another thing my parents believed was that I remember my father saying, I was born in 69, so in the 70s, middle class houses had this habit of having a cupboard and maybe, showing the best plates and the best cups or whatever glasses in it. And I remember him saying, in our house, that's not what you should see. I want my children to see books in the hall, so that that was something worth looking at, and we always used to see books, and that made books become so much part of our environment, part of our lives. And we had a bookshelf in our room. If you grow the collection there, that was connected to a sense of personal achievement. So by all this, they made sure that books and reading were integral to our growing up. So that was to show you, to answer the question, how do we get children to read, before I tell you the benefits of it, right? Okay, so I've listed a few benefits. I mean, there are probably a large number which I might not speak of, but the things I thought of today. The first one is the connection literature has to morality, right? And Margaret Atwood has put this beautifully in her book Negotiating with the Dead. She had said morals are the husband or wife of fiction, right? They are integrally connected together. Fiction has some moral value given to it, even though that may not be a very clear message. Normally, any novel, any surrealistic, any novel has some moral value connected to it. And children's literature especially have the conflict between good and evil, right? There'll be monsters and witches and all that on one side, and a hero on this side, and that conflict invariably makes sure that good wins. In children's literature, good always wins, right? So children are given the knowledge or the belief that between good and evil, if there is a fight, it will be the good that wins. So whatever fairy tale you take, there is definitely a villain, and that's a good thing to learn as well, that not all people in the world are good. There's always a villain, and whatever problems that the villain puts to the hero or the heroine or whatever, it's the good person who finally wins, right? So if you look at fairy tales like Cinderella or Snow White or whatever, there's a lot of evil happening and there's a lot of heartache happening, but finally the good person wins. Now that's the difference between adult, perhaps more realistic fiction. We are more jaded, we are more bitter about the world, and we have dystopian novels as well. But children's literature is generally left free of that. Okay, so because when little kids grow up, they need to grow up knowing that if you are given a choice, perhaps take the path towards the good, the straight and the narrow, because that is what that will generally win. And I think that lesson is important if your idea is actually to build a very straight, very upright individual in the future. So morality was the first thing that I wanted to speak about. And the second thing, fiction can really activate, really make powerful a particular faculty in the brain, and that's the faculty of imagination, right? The power to imagine, the power to think of things which are not existing now but can exist in the future is a vital faculty for human beings in general, right? And fiction is one of the best ways to make that faculty more powerful, because especially when you're reading, and you know, not particularly when you're watching TV or when you're watching a film, especially when you're reading, you have the text. Yes, you have the pictures as well, but the action happens in your own head. You create the movement, you create the gestures, right? And there is a film that you direct yourself in your head. This happens in reading, this happens in audiobooks as well. If you remember, you know, when I was small, we had Muan Palace and Monarathan and all that. You could hear Kadira's voice, and you imagine that character, or Pinaz, or Arachi, whoever. The imagination happens in our head. That's a very powerful faculty to have, because I think the progress of human beings happens because some people are capable of imagining things to exist which don't exist now. Otherwise, aeroplanes or, you know, trains or whatever were created because somebody imagined it and did the science, did the work necessary to put that imagination into reality. Now, one thing I want to tell, all these things that I speak about can be used for the good or the bad. I mean, someone had to imagine the nuclear bomb as well, and all these weapons which are being used in war. That is also imagined first. So that is why I started with morality. Imagination linked to morality would keep the world safe. If it's not, it can be equally dangerous, right? So my starting point being morals was that everything I'm saying afterwards can be either used for good or bad. But if you make sure the literature is read, like serious kind of good literature, possibly your child, if he becomes an imaginative person, may not use it for harming the world, right? Now, the thing with imagination is, when you, this is something when you try to teach a child to read, perhaps I should have mentioned this before I started listing as well. Do not try to control what he reads, right? When he is very young, yes, you have to. I mean, a little baby won't know what book to go and read, and maybe in nursery you help them. But when they become teenagers or young adults, I would advise parents step back a bit, right? Because another question I get asked is, what should I read or what should I get my kids to read? And the answer I give is, please read whatever you like to read. And I would tell the parents, take your children to a good library, a good bookshop, let them pick what they want. Because something I learned through my own experiences, you know, of raising kids. At the beginning, yes, like they read Enid Blyton's, the stuff that I read when I was growing up. But I used to take them to this library, and if they couldn't come and I went and I picked for them, they never read what I picked. Because their taste, they live in a different world than we do, or we did when we were small, right? So they just couldn't stand Enid Blyton, and they were reading people I had never read. I mean, they were not writing at that time, Rick Riordan and people. Like Rick Riordan I read just simply out of curiosity. I found it difficult to go through because the pacing was very, very quick. Like in 1.5 pages, the world had collapsed and few bombs had gone. And you know, the pacing is so quick, which is suitable for kids because their lives, which is like based on phones and TikToks, are very quick. So one of the problems that I see in Sinhala literature, and especially youth and young children's literature, is what is available may not have moved fast enough to suit young minds in Sri Lanka right now. I mean, with all due respect to Martin Wickramasinghe and Ape Gama, yes, you should read it as a classic. But to expect a child now to connect completely to that idealistic village is a bit odd, because they cannot identify with it. The village itself may not exist. Yes, we should read that, but also if we can have available in our own tongue, or in Tamil or whatever, in Sinhala, quicker paced, urban stories as well, it might help. Because otherwise what's happening is, Our native young youth children's literature is not moving in the pace that the lives of these kids are moving, and they might lose interest, right? So I do believe we have an excellent, quite fabulous fiction genre for adults in Sinhala. I'm not knowledgeable enough to talk about Tamil here. I know in Sinhala it exists, but whether we have an equally dynamic children's or young YA, youth literature, young adult literature, I'm not too sure, right? There must be a few, but whether that's enough to feed the very deep hunger that children have, curiosity, I'm not too sure at all, right? So those are other problems which is not connected very much to my talk now, but I would say, so please teach them to read in English as well, because English young literature, youth literature, even children's literature, the wealth is enormous. I mean, world like phenomenons like Harry Potter, these are YA, young literature, young adult literature, Rick Riordan, young youth literature, right? YA is young adult literature. So please teach them English simply for the fact of getting them into reading while they are growing up, right? And the sooner you start, the better. So my talk today is not about teaching English, but I'm just connecting it to the fact that English language has so much wealth in the children's category and the young adults category in literature. Okay, so I spoke about morality, I spoke about imagination, and the third point I want to touch is good fiction develops language skills, right? And I don't mean just second language skills, I mean language skills. That the power of language, whether you're talking in your native tongue or a second language, that is a vital power, right? Because in Sri Lanka, we need to teach our kids to have a decent conversation, disagree without arguing, that you can have deep discussions, right? So unfortunately, if you look at the leadership that we have, or the parliament, we see so much argument going on, we see a lot of shouting. But the fact is, rhetoric, the power of argument, discussion, that is so important. And if we can, to do that, your language power has to be good, it has to be sophisticated, right? So that sophistication can be achieved if the child is given access to good literature when he's small, because he'll be reading quite a lot. Reading naturally builds up your language skills. And very interestingly, I was listening to a TESOL seminar by a leading second language acquisition theorist called Dr. Stefan Krashen, right? Stephen Krashen. He said, if you allow children to read what they like, self-selected reading, even their GPA score, that is their normal subject, grade point average in normal subjects, increase. It's really weird. They don't have to read subject matter. But if they are allowed to read whatever they like, their natural curiosity gets activated. Their brain gets very kind of alive and not just dormant and dead. Unfortunately, our school system can make it dormant and dead by having not very interesting, not very updated, knowledge. So let's not try and change that system. That will take more energy than any of us have. But you can let your child walk into a library and pick what they want to read. And with them, their brain gets activated, which then has a fallback effect on what they are studying. They'll look at it more curiously. They'll go to the internet and find more facts. So that the idea is to keep the brain curious, to keep it activated, to keep it, with light bulbs going. Get them into reading, even their subject matter will improve. This is what Dr. Krashen says. He's available on YouTube. Please look at his YouTube videos. He says reading for pleasure, self-selected reading, where we don't say read this, let them pick. Then you will see how much they improve the general knowledge, which will even improve their subject matter knowledge as well. So that. let them read, it will improve their knowledge. And I said just now, it will also improve their language ability, and language ability is crucial in this world. The last two points I made, imagination and language skill, I think in the world when they go looking for jobs, those are going to be in high demand, right? Again, words can be used very powerfully for the good and the bad. Wars are driven by words now, more or less, right? And our media channels know how to use it to harm people, how to kind of divide ethnicities as well. If you read fiction like Professor Liyanage Amarakirti's Kurulu Hadawath, it shows how words are used powerfully with conscious intent to cause harm, right? And all in the name of good. So whatever, that power, again connected to the morality that you give first, will be of value, because it will also create super teachers. It will also create fighters for justice. It will also create people who will say, no, this is wrong, let's do that. That's persuasion, that's rhetoric. Your child will speak better if they read, right? If you want me to throw in a line as a creative writer, your child will write better if he reads as well. Okay, that's a different point altogether. So my third point was, teach them fiction, let them appreciate books as a child, starting with Ladybirds at whatever, because they will actually become better speakers when they grow up, better writers when they grow up, right? Then fourth thing, reading is pure fun, it's pure entertainment. If you let your child pick the book that he wants to read, you've given him a chance to be entertained, right? Now that the love of doing something, the love of being with books, this is something that we forget sometimes to put into the school system. Even learning, and we have a rather militarized school system anyway. We forgot that enjoyment is crucial for a child, that for a child to be activated mentally, enjoyment would mean so much to him, right? That can be given through books, even if school doesn't give it. All the good schools have good libraries, so I hope the librarians there will try to attract the kids as well. Enjoyment can be got out of books. It's a different enjoyment from watching films or cartoons. They have their own values. Books give enjoyment, and that can be easily put into the school system. Let's try and exploit that. And if you're a school teacher listening, if you're a school librarian listening, that's going to be important, that enjoyment part of it, right? And I want to say that my doctoral research was concerned with post-war fiction, and I combined it with anthropology. So I had some ethnographic research being done on their lives. Every single writer I interviewed, there were about like 10 multiple award-winning writers in Sri Lanka. All of them had a connection to someone who loved books. It could have been a parent, and if they were too poor to own books, could have been a librarian who brought them into that world of pure enjoyment, what Krashen calls the pleasure of reading. And they never left that world, and they became award-winning writers after that, and they were saved practically by some, maybe poverty, by despair, by having that world, the world of books to go into, right? And I remember I spoke about imagination. Imagination won't be only to create a product. Sometimes imagination is going to be vital for a child to go through, for example, a bad patch in his or her life in the future. Because if you are going through depression, or medical depression is something else that needs medical treatment. But if you are going through a really sad period, say, and you are really depressed, not the medical depression, you are really sad, being able to imagine otherwise will give that person the strength to go through that period. Okay? Because life is becoming increasingly hard, right? And we have seen too many young people give up. But if you can imagine otherwise, when things are really bad, it will be like a glimmer of hope to walk through that period of darkness. So you might actually be strengthening your child if you give them that power. Okay, and so my last point is actually one before the last point is personality. They will have stronger personalities, right? They will be stronger, they will be more courageous taking risks because imagination is there, and you know the power of your, you become more powerful when you have knowledge that is there, right? And you'll be upright enough to maybe try and make a difference if things are unfair. Every system in Sri Lanka is in need of improvement, so maybe they will contribute. So the point is not making them just get a job. The point is to make them make a difference in whatever field they are working in. You might be creating someone like that if even at 3, 4, 5 you're arming them with the knowledge, the pleasure and the confidence that books will give your child, right? Okay, the last point that I want to make is, and this again Dr. Krashan spoke about, literature will make the child have empathy. Right now, we know what sympathy is. Sympathy is to feel sad about somebody else's sadness. Empathy means to understand what somebody else is going through. Now, life generally, we only have one life. For example, my life right now, like as a woman in Sri Lanka, living in a particular economic and social level. But I have lived so many other lives through the books I read, right? I could have lived as a man, a animal even, in another planet. My level of life would have been very, very, very different. But when you're reading a good book, you walk in somebody else's shoes. You actually live that life. You actually go through all the feelings. So that somebody who's exposed to literature from young days have lived many lives, and therefore can understand so many people, more people than a non-reader. Because a reader would have lived many lives, while as a non-reader would only be confined to the limits of his or her world. And that empathy is going to be very necessary for him to go through society, for him to understand problems, for him to fight for fairness and justice if he's given a chance. A crucial need in this world, which, as you can see, a lot of unfairness is happening, right? Teach them that sensitivity, teach them that empathy by giving them the right books at the right time. Okay, so I actually listed about 5 or 6 points here. All are crucial because we live in a world, Sri Lanka needs so many improvements in so many fields, right? It might be difficult to change adults, still trying, but we are the ones who are molding children at this moment, right? And that responsibility, if we take seriously, then you need to take books and children's literature seriously as well. We are in a time where buying a book is not easy anymore. I don't think I could buy any of these books now. It's become so expensive. We are all fighting to make sure people don't go hungry. But if one system is working in this country, it's the national library system. It's the public library system. Villages have libraries. I haven't checked to see what the quality of books are, but hopefully they will have good books there. You don't have to worry too much about what will these books be, because there would have been some kind of curating going on. Now, talking about curating in places like America, some books were banned. So, and there are many writers who say make sure you pick the books that were banned by the government, because very often those books may have criticized the government for injustice. For example, Grapes of Wrath or something, it showed how workers were exploited. So, sometimes, I mean, in places like America, the good books might not be in libraries, where parents sometimes become very like gatekeeperish and say, don't show these books to our children. For people who say that, I love this comment again, where I read somewhere, you have every right to pick what your child needs when he is small. But that doesn't give you a right to decide what everybody else's children should be reading as well. That's a parental decision. Okay, so I'm generally against the banning of books. And I'm saying when the child is growing up enough to make his own decisions, please don't try to influence what he reads. Yes, of course, there are, things that are not too good for young adults to read. Those you can, make sure that he's not exposed to. But if you try to put your idea of what he should read or she should read, remember you might be stopping his whole desire to read altogether. And that's a crime. You won't just stop him reading one book. You might be stopping him reading any book in the future. Be careful. The last word I want to say before I go is, things have changed so much that they might be reading in ways we don't realize. Like for example, on their phones, there's something I think called Wattpad or whatever, where young people can write their own novels and they can read what others write. So I have seen the harm phones can do, undoubtedly. But there are young people who also know how to use phones productively. So just because they're on the phone all the time doesn't mean that they are completely lost. Some of them might actually be reading. Apart from Kindle and all that, the methods have changed. So I am from a generation that loves to have physical books like that, but the younger generation might be reading on Kindle or might be reading on other platforms. Most of the journal articles I read now are on the internet. So again, be careful when you condemn things completely, because trying to pull them back into the world we grew up might actually put a stop to some wonderful world of literature opening out to them on their own terms, right? Which I think as adults we should respect. So with all that, I thank the National Library for inviting me for this talk. I gave the same talk in Sinhala, which you can find in my channel. And I say this in English again because my channel has kind of the same content in both languages, because my idea is to make English more accessible to Sri Lankans. And I remember ending my Sinhala talk in that Zoom session by telling people, if there is no money, of course there is no money now to buy books, we have provided my University of Sri Jayawardenepura a project called the English for Fun project, where at nursery, primary, middle, upper and undergraduate levels we are uploading stories, right? And poetry. Poetry is another beautiful world you can enter. If you can find this website, it's English for Fun, and you put USJ, University of Sri Jayawardenepura, it will come in. It's all free, it's downloadable. So even if money is becoming a problem to all of us, there are free resources available. Just one time internet, you download everything and you'll have those stories read beautifully by a Sri Lankan UK actress called Trisita Jayasundara. And this is run throughout it's rolled out throughout the country through the National Library, through the public library system. So there are things available, look out for them. But if you have young kids, please understand that exposing them into good literature, children's literature, might be vital for all the reasons that I spoke about before. Thank you very much.